Prime Minister calls for a war on guns, meets with bilateral partners and business interests, and hands over $37 million indigent housing complex. You're watching Jamaica House Weekly. I'm Anthony Morgan. For the better part of last week, Prime Minister Andrew Holness was on assignment in the United Kingdom and the United States of America. On September 19, Mr. Holness attended the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II in the United Kingdom. He used the visit to meet with King Charles III, who ascended the throne upon his mother's demise. Prime Minister Holness left England Monday for the United States of America, where he participated in the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. In his wide-ranging address, the Prime Minister called for a war on guns like the one that's been declared against drugs.
Jamaica does not manufacture guns, but our population suffers from the effects of widely available guns. The countries that manufacture weapons that are available to the public must implement stronger measures to ensure that those weapons do not end up on the streets and in the hands of people for whom they were not intended. In the same way that there is a concern about illegal drugs on the streets of the rich countries, there must be concern about guns on the streets of developing countries like Jamaica.
Mr. Holness also called on countries who benefited from the Atlantic slave trade to provide reparations to people of African descent. While acknowledging the sensitivity of the issue, the Prime Minister says bold steps must be taken to right the wrong.
The world cannot turn a blind eye to the systemic imbalances which persist after centuries of exploitation. If our moral standards today, on which we claim a higher civilization, acknowledges that actions in the past, which generated wealth for some by depriving others of their freedom, were wrong, then that same moral standard must lead those who benefited from the wrongs of the past and claim a higher civilization today to repair that which their morality now acknowledges to be an injustice.
In the meantime, Prime Minister Holness expressed hope that the high-level panel developing the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index will be fast-tracked. Once completed, the index will take into consideration the susceptibility of small island developing states like Jamaica to economic shocks as a prerequisite to accessing development financing. Mr. Holness stated Jamaica's belief that a comprehensive, targeted approach to financing development was needed. And ahead of the November 6 to 18 United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Egypt, the Prime Minister made an impassioned plea for nations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
We call on all countries to meet their commitments and contributions to climate targets. And we call on the developed world to increase their commitments and ambitions in climate financing, particularly for adaptation and loss and damage.
Mr. Holness proposed that February 17 be observed annually as Global Tourism Resilience Day. He also discussed access to technology and education, assistance to Haiti, the use of ocean and marine resources, as well as the ongoing war between Russia and the Ukraine. And while in New York, the Prime Minister held bilateral talks with Borut Pahor, the President of Slovenia. He also discussed deepening Jamaica-Kenya relations with the country's elected President William Ruto. Meanwhile, Mr. Holness talked development with the President of the Inter-American Development Bank. The Prime Minister also held talks with representatives from Exact Capital, Resort World and Pegasus Capital. Back on the island Friday, Prime Minister Holness ventured to 4th Street in Olympic Gardens, where he handed over a $37 million 12-unit indigent housing complex to residents. 9 of the 12 one-bedroom studio apartments have been set aside for victims of a 2018 fire which impacted 30 families in Bell Rock in the community. The remaining units will be distributed by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development.
These are units that the persons will be able to occupy We have not made any arrangements for them to pay rent, but they will basically have a peppercorn long-term lease. The idea, obviously, is that if they outgrow this, their circumstances change and they move out, then they can hand back the keys to us and we will give it to someone else who is in need. So this is another element of our social housing program.
And that's it for Jamaica House Weekly. Be sure to join us next time for more news stories coming out of the Office of the Prime Minister.